Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast. Join Corbin and Allen, along with guest hosts, as they bring their love for the cinema to discuss films from every genre and decade. Learn about the history of the film, little-known facts, and insightful explorations while they enjoy discussing your favorite film. The curtain is rising and your podcast is starting, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your guide to the silver screen.
Welcome back, listeners, to the 7th installment in our Christopher Nolan movie review series. Today we are reviewing Inception. This is your co-host, Corbin.
I'm Allen.
It's kind of crazy to think we are already 7 movies in. We're getting pretty close to the end.
The last movie with The Dark Knight, and then now this week, I would say, are definitely the 2 movies that, if his name wasn't already known, they at least very much solidified his name in pop culture with these 2 movies. So this is, I would consider to be probably his most popular of his series, especially so far, of the movies that he's produced.
Yes, he does have 3 theatrically released films for us to go, and supposedly Tenet is going to come out in theaters in July. They're sticking to it.
Date hasn't changed yet, so hopefully.
It's like the only theatrical movie that hasn't changed. So as of this recording, now, when this recording releases in a few weeks, maybe it'll be different.
Right.
But as of this recording, we are still going to go see Tenet in theaters this July, which I hope that's the case. I don't want it to be pushed back to like next year, like the Fast and Furious 27 was.
Yeah, that would be nice if they didn't do that. But from what I understand, some theaters are going down the route of still allowing people to come in, but having them sit, the basic 6 feet apart from another person kind of thing with face mask. You must have a face mask. I've heard of some doing that. So maybe they'll do that with this. Maybe they'll still release it. I guess only time will tell until, it actually comes out.
That will be interesting, but we will keep you posted, listeners.
Yeah.
Inception was released 2 years, almost to the day after The Dark Knight. It came out July 15th, 2010. And The Dark Knight came out July 16th, 2008. Right.
So he seems like June, July is around the months that he likes to release, because I know that within it also coming out in July, about mid-July.
The Dark Knight Rises will come out in July as well. Interstellar kind of bucked the trend with November. That is interesting, but I'd say that makes some sense. And Dunkirk was also mid-July as well, and with Tenet July as well. So probably from here on out, I have a feeling we're going to be getting most Nolan movies in July, because these movies are crazy earners at the box office.
Oh, yeah.
I was shocked to see how much Inception alone earned at the box office.
Oh, yeah. With a budget of $160 million, which is still a very large budget, opening weekend, $67.8 million, which is pretty good. But totally domestically, it made $292.6 million. Foreign markets, $541.3 million, with a worldwide total of, by itself, $833.8 million. I would say this is definitely helped in no part by, or it's definitely helped by The Dark Knight as well, because as we know, The Dark Knight was a juggernaut in the box office, and I would say because of that, so was Inception.
And it's crazy because absolutely it is The Dark Knight, because on all the TV spots and all the trailers, they said from Christopher Nolan, the director of The Dark Knight.
Right.
And if you haven't listened to our review of The Dark Knight, make sure to go back and listen to that the week previous, and all the other Nolan films as well, because we have reviewed them all up to this point.
Yep.
And those reviews build off each other. And it is important to note, just to refresh here, The Dark Knight grossed over $1 billion at the worldwide box office. This film, which is a brand new independent property, it's not a franchise, it's a brand new creation, nearly grossed $1 billion worldwide.
Yeah, it's very close to the $1 billion mark, which, like you said, as an independent property, not really attached to anything outside of Christopher Nolan's name, very impressive.
And just remember, Christopher Nolan's first film, when he was 28, grossed $48,000.
Yes. So he's come a long way.
He's come a crazy long way considering this is his 7th film, and his films have grossed around $2.5 billion.
Which is ridiculous. Which half of that's due to The Dark Knight.
Yeah, half of that is just one film alone.
Yeah.
But it is crazy also because his films were always grossing in the 100s usually. Got a little bump there with Batman Begins, and then it dropped down to the 100s, and then Dark Knight skyrocketed to 1 billion. And so from here on out, he's going to be Warner Brothers' cash cow.
Oh, yeah.
And Warner Brothers will say, whatever you want to do, no studio interference. We completely trust you. Do whatever you want. Here's all the money you want, because you know he's going to reap it back like tenfold.
Yeah. And even his box office placement is still pretty respectable, especially for a, standalone property. It did open at number 1. It actually went up against Despicable Me, which has already been in the box office for a week at this time. But also opened with The Sorcerer's Apprentice, a Walt Disney picture, which I believe was a flop, if I'm not mistaken.
Not in my book. I liked it at the time.
Yeah, I've only seen pieces of it, but I do remember it not doing so well in the box office. Other movies that week, Toy Story 3, which had been in for, 5 weeks, it looks like, at number 5. The Twilight Saga, I think that's Eclipse, what was number 4, was just in its 3rd week. See, the week after that, it was still number 1 after it's being there for its 2nd week. Salt came out that week, opening up number 2. Despicable Me number 3. Number 4, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Number 5, Toy Story 3. And then the week after that, still stayed number 1.
Wow.
For its 3rd week, Dinner for Schmucks came out that week, followed by Salt, Despicable Me, Charlie St. Cloud, which was in its 1st week, and then Cats and Dogs, The Revenge of Kitty Galore was number 6. So, yeah, it did very well on the box office, I would say, especially with its placement. In fact, let's see here. It was number 1 for its first 3 weeks. The 4th week went down to number 2. Week after that, number 4. Week after that, number 9. So, yeah, did very well in the box office, both in placements and its earnings.
And you and I can satisfyingly say we contributed to that.
Yes, we did. I think this was the first Nolan film that I saw in the theater. And it was with you.
Yeah. So opening weekend, I went and saw this with my parents. I think my sister was probably out of town, maybe on some kind of youth trip or something. Saw it with my parents. And then I thought, it just blew my mind when I saw this. I was 15 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, Alan, you got to see this movie with me.
Yep.
And this was before you and I had ever really watched like a lot of movies together, I would say.
Yeah, this was pretty early on in, I guess, that phase of our lives.
Mm-hmm. And I remember it was probably like maybe after church one night or something. I don't remember. I just remember you and I went and saw it. We went and saw it on the east side of town at the East Theater.
Yeah, it was,
I was so excited.
Wasn't it also like a group of people too? There's a few others that went with us. I forget who all it was, but I remember there being a group, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right, but I only had eyes for you that night. So we saw it that night, and I remember your reaction. You were just as mind blown as me. And that's something I really love doing as well, is going to see a movie, and if I love it, going to see it with my friends, and then getting to see your reaction as well.
Right. I remember my initial thoughts on it where I didn't really know what to think.
Oh, yeah.
I remember at first thinking maybe I don't like it, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, maybe I do like it. And then, of course, since then, I've seen it probably about 10 or dozen times for all I know. And the more I watched, the more I liked it. So, yeah, I do remember my first reaction being kind of polarizing, like, what in the world did I just see? And then me kind of just slowly falling in love with it as time went on.
And I think that's usually how, like, great films are. I'm not trying to show my hand too much here, but I'm just saying that's usually how critically acclaimed films are, for at least me, is I usually take time I got to absorb it. I just remember when I first saw Citizen Kane, I thought, it's not that good. What's all the hype about?
Right.
Well, surprise, surprise. It is one of the greatest films ever. And when I saw Paul Anderson's There Will Be Blood, which I also showed you.
That's right.
And I'm like, the first time I saw it, I'm like, not that good. But I've returned to it so many times. I'm like, oh, yeah, this movie is actually pretty phenomenal.
Right. Right.
And this film I've kind of treated like a very nice steak and lobster dinner over the years.
Mhm.
It's one that I will treat myself to every couple years, not once a year, but over the years, I kind of have a hankering to return to this movie.
Yeah.
And the great thing is this film is so dense that every time I rewatch it, when I rewatched it for this review, there was so much I didn't remember, and it did feel like rediscovering it over again. And I know it's also one that's it's kind of like a crowd pleaser whenever people do come over.
Yep.
And people are deciding to what movie should we watch. Usually that's one that gets thrown around because people want to see it on the big screen.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And I just remember when your family was over here it was a while ago now. I remember your cousin was like, "Ooh, Inception, we should watch Inception."
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that one was brought out. I forgot about that. Yeah.
And it's no surprise that the critics loved this movie.
Oh yeah. Audiences and critics loved this movie. Scores on IMDb at an 8.8, a very high score, with a placement of number 13 in the top 250. Not quite the number 4 of The Dark Knight, but it's still very high on that list.
Yeah, so far his highest placed film aside from The Dark Knight.
Yeah, exactly. Metascore at 74, which is a bit lower, I guess, than I was expecting, but still very respectable. Rotten Tomatoes at an 87 with an audience score of 91. Cinema score at a B+, with Letterboxd score at a 4.2. So very high scores pretty much all across the board here.
Very high scores. The one that speaks the most, and I would say the most accurate reflection of how people feel about this film today, is the 8.8 on IMDb.
Oh yeah.
And it's number it's considered the 13th greatest film of all time, and it just came out 10 years ago,
which is ridiculous.
And it's crazy because we just said last week that Nolan's The Dark Knight is number 4.
Yep.
And so far up to this review, Nolan has 5 films. 5 of his 7 films so far up to this review are in the IMDb top 250.
That's just stupid.
Yeah, the only ones that aren't are his very first film, Following, which is a 70-minute, very young creation, and Insomnia. Go listen to our thoughts on why that's not in the IMDb top 250.
Yep. Now, the idea for Inception actually has been around for a very long time, actually dating back to around 2001 when Christopher Nolan pitched the idea to Warner Brothers. Now, at the time, it was a very different movie. He had more of a horror angle that he was taking on it, still keeping it around dreams, but taking it more along the horror side instead of what we get out of the heist movie. He decided that he wasn't exactly the most experienced for the idea that he had. So he wanted to wait until he had, more filmmaking experience behind him before he actually went and started making this. Then he did Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and then that's when he felt that it was good. He had enough experience at that point to start production. Some pretty big influences were The Matrix, Dark City, and 13th Floor. He worked on the script on and off for about 10 years. He was actually in talks with DiCaprio to have him in a movie before Inception, but he just was never available. And then when DiCaprio read the script or in the idea for Inception, he became very intrigued by it. So pretty much after DiCaprio was solidified that he was going to come on, that's when Nolan finished the script. And then after he got done with The Dark Knight, went right into production for Inception. It's surprising to think that this is a movie that he's had on hand for a long time, but just wanted to wait until the right moment to make it.
That really surprised me when I heard Nolan say he started working on the idea for that film 10 years ago.
Yep.
10 years from 2010. So yeah, around 2000, which would have been very close to when he was working on Following and Memento as well.
Yep.
And I will say that there are a number of similarities, at least structurally and probably character emotion wise, to Memento.
Yes, there are some pretty definite callbacks and maybe even homages, but definitely structure-wise, they do feel rather similar in their execution.
And his wife, Emma Thomas, who is also the producer on all of his films, she did say, like you were saying, that he would tweak it and rewrite it at the end of each of his films.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because Nolan said he was excited to explore the potential of the human mind through this film.
Yeah.
And he was also talking about how dreaming is a healthy experience which allows us to view our world in surreal ways as opposed to other ways of psychological methods.
Right.
I also noticed he brought back Ken Watanabe and Cillian Murphy, both villains from Batman Begins.
That's right. Yeah, Cillian Murphy would kind of be a mainstay for a lot of his movies. Michael Caine is also back, which, as we mentioned in previous podcasts, he'll pretty much be in every single Nolan film from here on out. So yeah, we do have some returners coming back. No Christian Bale this time, but we do have Cillian Murphy, Michael Caine, and Ken Watanabe. So people that, and this happens quite often, actors will stick with directors. So we're kind of seeing that now that he's becoming a bigger name.
And he would bring Marion Cotillard, I don't really know how to pronounce her last name, doing my best, and Tom Hardy and Cillian Murphy and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. They would roll right into his next film, The Dark Knight Rises.
Right, exactly. So yeah, and these are already pretty big names too. Just like how last time we noted with The Dark Knight, there were some pretty big names in that, along with a couple of other movies. This one definitely as well has some pretty big names to it.
And I would say that's a very Hitchcock move to work with the same actors you have on previous projects, because I knew Hitchcock did that a lot.
Right.
And as for his crew, he did bring back Hans Zimmer to score it. And the one that shocked me is, Wally Feister is back with cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee Smith, I think, is also back with editing. He's edited all of Nolan's films. The only guy that didn't return was Nathan Crowley, who's been his production designer on all of his films. He got Guy Hendricks Diaz to design this film. And the design is utterly brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Crowley didn't return because after The Dark Knight, he went straight to Michael Mann's Public Enemies with Johnny Depp. And then in 2012, he does return to The Dark Knight Rises. He does come back to Nolan, so it's not like they had a falling out or anything. But he was also working on Disney's massive sci-fi epic John Carter at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So I think he's like, hey, I want to be there for Inception, but Disney wants me to do John Carter, so kind of don't say no to Disney.
Yeah, you can't say no to the mouse. But it did have a pretty good Oscar run. 8 nominations and 4 wins.
So this makes 21 Oscar nominations for Nolan's across 7 Nolan films.
That's way too many Oscars for one man.
So for 7 films, 3 times as many Oscar nominations. And for this would be Christopher Nolan's personal 3rd Oscar nomination, because he was nominated for writing Memento and he was nominated for writing this film and also for Best Picture for this film as well.
But yeah, it ended up winning for cinematography, sound mixing, sound editing, and visual effects. It did get a nomination for score. Again, didn't win. Just kind of like The Dark Knight, didn't win. But also one for art direction. Also didn't win.
I am very surprised it didn't win for art direction. Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland got it. Which, don't get me wrong, has great art direction, but I don't know. I'm just saying, nobody talks about Alice in Wonderland anymore, do they?
Yeah. Even when the sequel came out, no one really talked about that one either.
And I think a lot of people were also shocked that The Social Network got the Oscar for original score over Inception. And this is pretty incredible that this is Nolan's first film to be nominated for Best Picture. We argued last week, not amongst each other, but we made the case that The Dark Knight should have been his first film to be nominated for Best Picture.
Right.
The King's Speech beat this film for original screenplay.
That's right, it did. And The King's Speech is all over the Oscars this year. The more I'm looking at all of these nominations, it's everywhere. It's one of those movies where it gets to the Oscars and it gets like a ton of nominations. So
King's
yeah,
Speech,
it was everywhere in the 2011 Oscars.
yeah, King's Speech won Best Picture.
Yeah.
And the Tom Hooper, I believe, is the director. He would go on to also be a big deal with his adaptation of Les Miserables 2 years later in 2012.
And Cats.
Yes, and to completely fall from grace with his musical Cats, which I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's quite an interesting movie. But he was at the Oscars a few years later with The Danish Girl.
That's true. Yeah, he was really doing great. I don't know what happened with Cats. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say. This also, DiCaprio was big this year in Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island.
That's right. That's right.
And Scott Pilgrim versus the World came out this year.
Yes, a movie that I know both you and I absolutely love, which we've also reviewed, by the way.
Oh, yeah. We love Scott Pilgrim, so definitely go listen to our review of that.
Yes.
Iron Man 2 came out, which I guess everybody hates.
Yeah.
Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 came out. Insidious franchise was kicked off this year. Tron Legacy returned, which was my first IMAX experience, and I loved that movie. The Town came out. I love that movie as well. The Book of Eli came out. Love it. The Expendables was kicked off this year. M. Night Shyamalan was at the theaters this year with a little film called The Last Airbender.
Ah, yeah. We reviewed that. That is a movie. That is a movie.
Oh, it's so sad. Yeah, we reviewed all of Shyamalan's films, so definitely go listen to The Last Airbender. Shrek Forever After. Shrek ended with Forever After. Also, Jennifer Lawrence came on the scene in 2010 with her Oscar win for Winter's Bone.
That's right. Yeah, I still get to see that movie. I have heard about it, but I have not seen it.
No, same here. I started it and I haven't finished it. And of course, How to Train Your Dragon kicked off in 2010, which is crazy because the third one just ended last year, right?
Yeah, this last year it was up for, I believe, for an Oscar in animation.
Yes.
It didn't win though. But yeah, this was the year that it released. And I remember it being very popular because people were very surprised by how good it was back in 2010. I don't think I've seen it probably since around the time it came out. So I don't remember much from it.
And also the remake of True Grit was that year, and that was also pretty prominent. It went up with Inception with a number of Oscars.
Yeah, Haley Steinfeld actually got an Oscar or got a nomination for it for True Grit.
Oh,
I remember
wow.
that too.
Yeah, I saw that movie in the theaters, and I liked it. Jeff Bridges did good. Matt Damon was in it. I think the only reason that it was so good, it got so many things, is it's a Coen Brothers movie. I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've heard it's either just as good or better than the original. I haven't seen either, but I really want to.
I've seen the original a few times. It's very good. It's a definite recommend. I guess I'm going to eat my words here a little bit. True Grit was nominated for 10 Oscars. Oh gosh.
So it's Inception, True Grit, and The King's Speech were the three big movies of 2011 Oscars.
And The Social Network.
And The Social Network, yeah, that one too.
And if you want, True Grit's streaming on Prime Video right now, I saw. So
Ooh.
I might have to return to that one.
I might have to watch it, yeah.
Alan, do you remember seeing the trailer for this movie in 2010?
I know that I've seen it. I don't remember a whole lot from it. I mostly remember the music. Mind Heist was the track that played, and I remember everyone was fired up about it because it was so good when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
So I barely remember this trailer, but I do remember seeing it. So yeah, it was actually kind of interesting to return to it, seeing, how intriguing the idea was, because I remember being kind of mystified with, what exactly Inception was all about. So returning to it now, it definitely, I would say, would get me at least in the theater, because it comes off as somewhat of an action movie, but it's an action movie inside of dreams. And that's about as much as we know. There's something to do with the wife, and that's about as far as the trailer goes. So I would say it would get me in the seats. I would say that this is a trailer that would really intrigue me if I were more of what I am now back in 2010.
These are the best trailers for a Nolan film yet. And I would even say they're better trailers than what I saw with The Dark Knight. The theatrical teaser is very exciting, and the first theatrical trailer alone gives me chills. I mean, this looks like nothing I had ever seen before, and I do appreciate there's very minimal explanation. It gets me very intrigued. And the more I watched every theatrical trailer and every TV spot for this because they were on the Blu-ray. And it did bring me back after watching enough of them. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember seeing those on TV and just super intrigued, like, what is this movie about? And I'd say it's a pretty comparable experience now to seeing the trailers for Tenet.
Yeah.
Because I don't know a dang thing about what that movie's going to be about. But nevertheless, I'm super intrigued to see it.
Yeah, I do actually get some Inception vibes watching that Tenet trailer the more I think about it.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I'm so excited. But absolutely, clearly watching these trailers did get me in the theater opening weekend and within opening week twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, listeners, if you haven't seen Inception, where have you been?
Yeah.
But if you haven't, nevertheless, that's okay. I kind of envy you because this will be the first time you get to experience it. And it's a very exciting experience, I would say. So if you haven't seen Inception and you don't want the film spoiled for you, go ahead and click pause right now. Go ahead and watch the film and then come back and click play and we'll be ready to talk about it.
Okay. Well, you were having a heyday with the Memento summary. I had a very fun time piecing this one together. Okay.
Oh, that's thick.
Yeah, it's a thick one. I did a lot of minimization, so hopefully it's not too confusing, but here we go. Dom Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and Arthur, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, are extractors, but they specialize by getting information through people's dreams. When we first meet them, they've attempted an extraction on a man named Saito, played by Ken Watanabe, an owner of a very large energy company. The plan goes awry, however, when Saito realizes what their plan is. Come to find out, Saito is looking for some professional extractors, just the ones that he's run into. He tells Cobb that if he finishes the job he laid out for him, he would be able to go home and see his kids. But in order for him to do this, he must perform Inception, a near impossible task of planting an idea, whereas they've always specialized in just pulling out information from a person's mind. You see, Saito's plan is to plant an idea in a competitor's mind to dissolve his father's company. Cobb accepts this and gathers his team, Ariadne, who is played by Ellen Page, who will construct the dreams, Eames, played by Tom Hardy, who will become a different person, also known as a forger, Yusuf, played by Duleep Rao, who conducts the sedative for them to go as deep as they need to go, and Robert Fisher, played by Cillian Murphy, the competitor to Saito, the subject the team will plant the idea in. Saito buys out the airline Robert is flying in order to give the team enough time to get to Robert. The first level is a rainy city block in Los Angeles. They pick up Robert in a taxi, but are soon ambushed by Robert's projections. The group nearly escapes with their lives, but Saito is shot in the process, leaving them with very limited time before he plunges into limbo, forgetting all about his deal with Cobb. Cobb explains to Ariadne that what the deal is with his wife, who will randomly show up and cause havoc for Cobb when he's in these dreams. You see, Cobb knows Inception is possible because he tried it on Maul first. He planted the idea after they were so many levels deep that her world wasn't real. Unfortunately, this idea became her reality, and she got to the point where she stood out on a ledge and asked Cobb to jump with her so they could see their real children again. Cobb is unsuccessful in talking her down, and she jumps. Cobb then goes on the run away from his family. The team decides to continue the job. They drop the idea that Robert's father had a different idea in mind, mostly through his uncle Peter Browning, forged by Eames himself. Yusuf's job is to evade the deadly projections as the rest of the team goes under one more time to another level, which this time is a hotel. Here they plant the second idea. Cobb reveals to Robert that he is actually in a dream and that there are people trying to extract information from his mind, which in turn is actually turning Robert's subconscious against itself, gaining access to the third level, a snow base. Here, the projections are on high alert and more deadly than before. Saito's condition worsens. Just before Robert is able to get the last piece of puzzle and finish the job, Maul appears and kills Robert, sending him into limbo. Cobb and Ariadne head into limbo themselves to get Fisher, but Cobb stays to find Saito to remind him of the deal that they made, as at this point he is dead and also in limbo. We reach what we opened with, where the two men slowly begin to remember what the deal that they had made. The group awaken as the plane is landing, and the idea being successfully planted in Fisher's mind to dissolve his father's company. Saito remembers the plan he made to Cobb, making the phone call to allow him to walk through customs no problem. When they land, Cobb has no trouble walking through customs and is later picked up by his father, who takes him home. Cobb returns to his house and spins the top one last time as he embraces his kids, and the top begins to wobble before cutting to black and the credits roll. Okay. I think I got it all.
You did it. Now, it is interesting because, once again, with a Nolan film, you have to pay attention. And if you were paying attention, then I would say you're able to follow the movie. It's not one of those movies where no matter how razor sharp my attention is, I'm still going to be lost. It's not one of those movies, I would say.
Yeah, he does a very good job of, even though the details are very specific and get very convoluted and there's a lot of information that is here, the core story is very, very easy to follow. Yes. The extra details are things that I would say are things that you would probably just return to the movie to find more out about. And that was what happened with me, is I had a hard time figuring out what every character's role was in the story. The fact that Eames is a forger, he'll become another character in the dream to move the main subject down a certain line. You have Ariadne, who constructs the dreams. You have so many other people that are a part of this process. And I think that's what initially confused me. But the main story, I never really found anything to be too confusing, because the main story is easy to follow, but still packs a punch when you get to those later scenes.
There was only a couple times where I just slightly rewound because I wanted to make sure I understood the dialogue they were saying, like understand exactly what was going on. But I did watch it with subtitles, so I highly recommend you watch this with subtitles.
Yes, that definitely helps.
Now, the way Nolan starts this film off very much reminds me of Memento, because Memento starts at the very end of the film. And in many ways, this film begins with Cobb washing up on the shore of Saito's unconscious, and Saito has been in limbo for, 30, 40 years probably.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it jumps back in time, or not really too far back in time. It technically jumps probably a couple days back in reality time and not dream time. And Saito's a young man again. And that whole section will come towards the end of the film, and you'll learn what is going on there. It's a very intriguing way to start off the film. And Nolan did this on purpose because he wanted to essentially recreate the feeling of a dream right off the bat. Yeah. And within a dream, you are always dropped into situations. You're never really given much context of the situation. And slowly you become oriented to the reality of the dream as you begin to come out of it. So we're confused. Right. I'd say we're pretty confused right off the bat with these characters, what they're trying to accomplish. And this lady is showing up that Cobb knows, and she's going to shoot him. And you realize they're in a dream. And surprise, which I forgot about this. I forgot they were even within a dream as well. And they wake up from that on a train in Tokyo.
Right. And I think that's the thing I love the most, is that it doesn't start off with them just, they're just already in a dream, right? Which is, kind of cool, but at the same time, it's been done before. How about instead of just them being just in a dream, how about they're a dream within a dream? That's what I think makes this opening so interesting, at least for the first time that I watched it, was seeing that, they're not just one level deep. No, they're dreaming within the dream. That's, I think, what makes this movie almost instantly intriguing, is because you're already 2 levels deep, and then we'll find out later they go 3, and then later 4 levels deep technically when they go into limbo.
And the thing I appreciate is that Nolan doesn't pull these shenanigans by introducing limbo at the beginning of the 3rd act.
Right.
The movie opens in limbo.
Yeah, it does.
And so we are introduced to limbo to begin with, but we're not sure exactly what we're seeing. But yeah, then it does go a dream within a dream. And I just find it interesting on the Blu-ray. They included a full motion comic with music attached to it.
Oh, yeah. I think I've watched part of that.
I had never, even though I've owned this Blu-ray for, about 10 years, I've never watched it before until this recording.
Yep.
And I would say there is some helpfulness to it. It leads up right directly before the movie begins. It's called The Coble Job. And so I would say if you want some more context to kind of help orient you a little better within the story and characters, I would say that would be helpful because they teamed with Coble, and you do hear Coble thrown around a few times in this movie. I just remember when I first watched it, I was so lost. I couldn't figure out who Coble was. I was just always trying to catch up with this, but if you've seen this a few times, it's pretty straightforward who these players are, but they're trying to steal this information because Coble Engineering is in the process of bidding to build an oil pipeline up the entire east coast of Africa, hence why Coble is in Africa when Cobb goes there. But that endeavor is being financed by Fisher Morrow, which is the energy conglomerate whose major competitor happens to be Mr. Saito. And Coble Engineering wants to steal that information from Saito to sway Fisher Morrow in giving them the contract. So this is the whole corporate espionage side of it. And what becomes pretty ironic is that Saito easily moves Cobb and his people over to working for him instead of Coble. Coble says, if you fail us, we're going to turn you over to the American authorities. Saito says, if you succeed, I'll let you go home again.
Right. And it's also interesting, too, because this is a movie about planting ideas, right? It's a movie that, and they even state this a couple of times, an idea can be something that either will define you or could destroy you. Mm-hmm. And we see kind of both sides of that, one with Fisher and then one with Maul. Whereas with Maul, the idea that Cobb had planted destroys her, whereas with Fisher, the idea that is planted maybe even goes on for him to be successful. We don't really know, but it is something that necessarily destroys him. Right. Either way, it's interesting because you get that kind of starts off with with Saito's character and then Cobb. Saito plants this idea of hope inside of Cobb, says, okay, I can give you your kids back. Of course, you just need to follow through with this plan. You actually need to plant the idea of inside of Fisher. And so you get this idea of hope being planted inside of our main character, that he has the potential to go home. And as this movie stated, it kind of becomes something that either not something that kind of defines him, but at the same time, it's his driving force is this idea that he's latched onto, which is hope. Hope that he'll be able to see his kids again.
And that's the brilliant thing, is that this is a story within a story. It deals with kind of a overarching meta-narrative of corporate espionage, of these two global superpowers trying to take one of them down in very fascinating ways through the seemingly impossible use of Inception. But then the real story is about Cobb and Maul. And I would say at the very heart of this story, this is a story about relationships and exploring relationships on an intimate level. Because it's very interesting how Cobb finds Maul's safe where she put her token in there, or totem. Mm-hmm. And he's the one that plants the idea of Inception, which ruins her and eventually drives her to suicide. She doesn't believe it's suicide, though. She believes she'll wake up from the dream. And it's interesting because on the flip side of that, simultaneously, it seems like Cillian Murphy's character opens up a safe and he finds the pinwheel from a great memory. And the totem destroyed Maul, but the pinwheel basically saved Cillian Murphy from feeling these horrible feelings of anguish of not living up to his father. Yeah.
And it's interesting because this is not the first time that Nolan has dealt with ideas. That we noted this in, I think most notably it would be Batman Begins. This idea of fear overtaking somebody and eventually destroying them. And then again, we have that with The Dark Knight, we have that idea of chaos. What it is they're planting the idea of, is a person good, or is a person good when you really break it down, or are they not? This idea of chaos is, Nolan is very centered around ideas, not necessarily about other things, external forces. He's more he's more interested in more of the idea of something. What if we take this idea and expand upon that? That's what he says in this one. It makes it so powerful is, like he says, an idea planted inside somebody can be either their destruction or it can be their success. And I think that's what makes his film so intriguing, is because there's a lot to what he talks about. There's a lot to the subjects that he brings up in his movies. And it's because their ideas are not really concrete. That's what makes these movies so interesting and so enjoyable.
He did also introduce that in The Dark Knight as well. He explored the ideologies of like the Joker and Batman, and these ideas that the Joker had, and how eventually he will influence characters to seemingly do things they never would have done before. And like you said, those are more so done through external circumstances instead of these like more internal mind games, as you will. But yeah, the persuasion of reality and how people view that is very important to Nolan's cinematic oeuvre. Especially as we see in Memento. Memento deals not so much with ideas, but with the truth. And we all kind of have our own subjective view of reality, but then we know there is an overall objective view of reality. Because we see like Maul, for instance, her subjective view had become so warped that she believed that the world wasn't real, and the only way to wake up from it was to die. And Cobb, his whole thing is that I know that's not true. I know this world is real, but nevertheless, he's always ready to shoot himself to get out of a false reality to awake into a real reality. I mean, it's really just incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Cobb's character so interesting, is that he's living in the nightmare that he accidentally created himself. He's living in his own perspective of reality because he was the one who planted this idea inside of his wife's mind, the idea that her world around her isn't exactly as real as she thinks it is. And she becomes to believe that she's living in a dream. And so when we get that scene not long after the first job that we see goes bad, and he's in his hotel and he's spinning the top and he's getting ready to shoot himself, it's interesting to see that, if he's constructed this nightmare to a point where Maul's character is literally just a projection from himself, his subconscious, but is infecting everything that he does. And it's a thing that gets to a point where it's mostly fueled by his guilt, where the job that they're on gets so at risk because of Cobb and his subconscious that he literally almost costs the lives of his team and takes the responsibility to go down and solve it for himself. So it's really, I think it's what makes his character so interesting, is seeing how, this guilt that he has for planting this idea infect him, and then also something that he also ends up having to kind of forgive himself for doing in the end, and save his team, not only his team, but also himself. It's really interesting how Nolan writes the character of Cobb.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even it's really incredible to think that he is no longer the master of his own reality. He's become a slave, a subject to dreams. And you notice, I believe it's his father-in-law. Maybe it's his father.
I think it's his dad. You're talking about Michael Caine?
Yeah.
I think it's his dad.
Okay, I have never been quite clear on that every time. But he is the one that taught him how to dream, how to build within dreams. And you learn that he does have this guilt that dreams were never supposed to be used to make money, to trick people into things. It was supposed to be a creative, beneficial thing for mankind, and not some warped thing that's going to drive people to kill themselves and question reality and question the truth and objectivity. And so he's turned it into a real nightmare. And I think the scene that probably really hits me the most with Cobb's predicament is when he is getting off the plane with Saito and he's saying, do I have a choice? And that's also a really big thing in Nolan's films is like freedom of choice, like the battle of free will.
Yeah.
And Cobb just asking, do I have a choice, shows that he's really become a slave to some very powerful people. And Saito says, yeah, you do have a choice. And he's saying, but you have a choice to keep living on the run, or you can make the choice to do this one last job with me. And you'll gain your freedom from that, which is ironic in himself. In order to achieve freedom from his circumstances, he has to delve farther into the situation than he really ever has before.
Yeah, exactly. He has to do the thing that he pretty much so he has to do the thing that caused him to go on the run in the first place. He has to perform Inception again. And I like that visual too at the very end when he finally when he's going to see Saito for the last time and he's in the limo for the last time we see him. It's really cool because we get to see him wash up on a beach, which is right after he lets go of Maul and forgives himself. And we get to see how he literally washes up almost as if he's born again on this beach and confronts Saito and reminds him of the deal that they made. I like that. I love that visual. I didn't notice it till this time when I was watching it, that visual of him washing up on this beach, which we do see in the opening, but without the context, it's hard to have that emotional weight until we get to the very end of the movie and we see the journey leading up to that point.
It is an absolutely powerful depiction, and one of the best depictions probably of the mind on film, I would say. A lot of times films will depict, or even short stories or stories, for instance, will depict the mind as a house with many rooms, or as a maze, kind of like in The Shining with the maze at the Overlook Hotel. So a house is very prominent for a mind, but this is interesting because they create a whole city. And you can see how the whole city, it's meant to look like a landscape, like cliffs. And it's just deteriorating as they just wash up on the shore of it. And it's just a new world that they can create. But at the same time, this whole limbo area, which is interesting because limbo is kind of a Middle Ages Catholic Christian construct.
Yeah.
That's not really exactly what they do with it in this movie, but it's basically just this state of nothingness. Like you can't really achieve any true progress down there and there. But the symbolism in this movie is, I'd say, pretty powerful.
Yeah. It's also really cool too, because you do get to see, well, again, Cobb has to face he has to face what he has done, right? He goes back to limbo and he gets to see what was left from when him and Maul were there, which is pretty much he's like the only person really that's ever actually done anything there, is build what him and Maul had constructed. That's what exists there in limbo. And that's kind of what Arthur says at one point when when Saito was shot and they pulled it into that garage, he says, there's nothing down in limbo except whoever was there last. Whoever left something behind, and which is Cobb. And it's cool to see that visualization of this deteriorating city that him and Maul created, and how it kind of is partially due to the fact that, him and Maul haven't really been together for so long, or haven't been together for a very long time because she died in somewhat recent times, and you get to see how much of that is deteriorated. And I also love the visual of Maul as well, because Maul is... when you see her, she comes off as very, very angry all the time, but that's because that's Cobb's subconscious view of her. That's what his mind is making up because of mostly fueled again by the guilt that he has of the act that he has put upon her, which is planting that idea.
And this isn't the second time that Nolan has used character names that have an actual meaning in real life with words. Because in Spanish, Maul means bad.
Right.
And also in Insomnia, Detective Dormer in Spanish means to sleep.
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely a play on names. Speaking of which, Cobb is pulled from his very first film, Following, where there's a character in there called Cobb.
That's right.
He makes a comeback.
That's right. Cobb is the thief in Following, and which I was confused because I remembered Tom Hardy's character being called Cobb. So I was really confused this time watching. and it is interesting because Maul is supposed to be his loving wife, but she has a very jealous side, which always turns to be violence, but that's just a projection of her. So it's part of his subconscious sabotaging himself to stay down in limbo where he is able to fix the mistakes of his life. Yeah. Because when he's dreaming, which we find is the only way he can dream is by putting himself under, and Ariadne goes into his mind, which he creates different kind of portraits, which are accessed through the elevator. Yeah. And he says, this is the only way that I can change these mistakes I've made in the past. And that scene really hit me because those changes have no bearing in reality. You can't really change the past, but in his dreams, he's able to create a perfect world that is not encumbered by all of his mistakes. And he's also able to kind of free himself from the guilt of his wife dying. Now, it's a powerful moment in the end of the film when he does confront Maul and he says, you would never live up to all the perfections and imperfections of my real wife. Yeah. And there's that really, I'd say, really breathtaking moment. It gives you chills when she says, and once again, it's interesting because she's saying, you said we would grow old together. Now that's a projection of his mind. He's the one that has to come to terms with this, not her. Yeah. And he comes to terms with it and finally says, we did grow old together. And you realize that they were down in limbo for about 70 years. Right. And lived into about probably their hundreds at least. That's pretty brilliant. And that also plays into the editing, I would say, as well. This film is so well edited.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is a film where, again, this really shows, as if it hadn't before, this really shows not only how good of a storyteller the Nolan brothers are, it also shows how well edited their movies are. Because, again, like with pretty much every movie, it's the editing that kind of ends up editing is called the last rewrite of the story, right? So it really shows, how good the editing is in these movies when it's told as well as they are. And this is no exception. This is told very, very well. And the edit also edited very, very well, just like his last few movies.
It's really shocking this did not get an Oscar for editing, not even a nomination. Yeah. Got it for sound editing. Yeah, there's a reason that Nolan works with Lee Smith every time. And there is that visual consistency across all of Nolan's films. And Nolan really does this brilliant thing I've loved. And he's done this probably back to Memento, at least to Insomnia with the editing, where, and I've always loved this. I would say this is a lot of foreign directors, older foreign directors have done this as well, where they will overlay either a memory or a flashback on top of the current scene that is happening, but they won't include audio within that flashback. Kind of like how we would really think in real life. When we create those memories, we conjure up the images, but that's just it. And they're always quickly interspersed. Nolan and Lee Smith do a fantastic job doing that here as well. Like when Cobb and Ariadne are creating a dream, and he says, is this place real? And she says, yeah, I walk here to school every day. And all of a sudden, Cobb starts remembering him and Maul sharing a nice little beautiful moment together, just kind of like laughing and holding each other on that bridge. And that's just an example of how that editing also affects the emotion of the scene.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And also one thing that I would say affects the emotion of the scene is the score. Here for this movie, because Hans Zimmer's returned from The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. And I would say this is, and especially the song Time, which is very iconic at least at this point. This is probably, I would say, tied with The Dark Knight with probably the best score that we have of Nolan so far.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that as well. I did put that in my notes, and I would say it's probably the greatest blend of visuals with a soundtrack that I can think of, and not just within the context of Nolan, but where the visuals and it blends. Now, when we rewatch Interstellar, maybe I'll say it's Interstellar because I remember that one impacting me a lot as well. But the score here is just incredible. I would say it's consistently better than The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight has some of those kind of weird moments where it is like just those two notes being played together, and those create like a character theme. But I just want to talk about my favorite scene here, and it does involve the score as well. It all comes together so beautifully. And my favorite scene is the kick once all of the dreams are coming to their climax. When Ariadne falls off the building in limbo because she has to give herself such a powerful kick to come back up into the third or fourth level of the dream. And it's that close-up shot of her face as she's just like falling from the skyscraper. And then it cuts to her face rising up in the elevator in zero gravity and her eyes open. Oh my gosh, I get chills every time I watch that. No matter what, no matter how many times I see this movie, I get chills. Definitely
the best track. It's not long before that scene happens, actually. That's probably my favorite track and my favorite part of the movie. It's the track, it's called Don't Think About Elephants. It's not, I don't know if it's on the regular edition of the soundtrack, but I know it exists. That part of the movie is probably my favorite part. It's right before everyone heads down into limbo. It's that scene up until that point that is definitely my favorite.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of that scene. It's such a funny scene when he's like, "Don't think about elephants. What are you thinking about? Elephants."
Yeah.
I always love that part.
Yeah.
But yeah, that scene mixed with the score, and that's happening all at the same time that Cobb is coming to terms with Maul in limbo. And as I said, when they are growing old together and he answers they did, every time and I'd probably say that whole entire sequence, that climactic sequence, also at the very same time when Fisher is realizing that his dad, which is not probably technically true, but his dad says, "You're not a failure. I'm just disappointed that you tried." All of it is happening at once with the score of that whole bomb, 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 and everything is converging all at once. I'm probably going to say this, the best edited and mixed sequence ever in the history of cinema, right there.
Yeah. And you can't understate the power that the score has of this movie, because with the bomb that it made up, it was copied again and again and again and again and again in Hollywood for years. And I would say even now we're still trying to get rid of it. It still pops up every once in a while. That's something that's because of the score, because of how iconic it was. Transformers copied it. Pretty much any action movie for the next couple of years copied it. It was everywhere. That bomb that was made up. Actually, it's from the French song that they use for the kick. That's what it was derived from. That's right. That French song is really cool when it plays in real life and then it echoes into the dream and you know that something is about to happen. And that's also just a great audible cue to heighten the suspense as well. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One thing I learned while watching the Blu-ray features on this is how much practical effects they used. And this is a thing with Nolan. He's like, we're going to go practical as much as we can and maybe use some CGI to enhance the scene or make it less dangerous. One thing that shocked me, I couldn't believe this was real, is when Cobb and Ariadne are sitting at the French cafe and the cafe blows out and the car flips and it all blows out. That's practical. Really? Yes. They tested that so many times and they showed the footage to DiCaprio and to, what's her name that plays Ariadne? Ellen Page. Yeah, Ellen Page. And they're like, yeah, are you guys okay with this? We're really going to blow this cafe and flip this car in front of you. And they're like, okay, let's do it. So they did it. The only thing is they added the glass. They added little bits of glass. And of course, when everything kind of slowly starts to like pop together, no one wanted that to have this like underwater feel, like time is slowing down and everything is like moving slower, like it's underwater. But I'm shocked. Yeah, they really did blow that out and flip the car. That's not CGI. I thought for like years that was CGI.
Mm-mm.
That's ridiculous. That's actually I didn't even know. One of my favorite parts is the action scene in the hotel hallway when they're like rolling around on the ceiling, on the walls.
Oh, yeah.
I watched the special feature on that. They actually built like a hallway and then just rotated it. They kept the camera stationary and they just rotated this entire hallway, which is absolutely insane to me. That's why I think that scene is also iconic in itself, is because nobody else has done that before, I don't think. They've taken like literally an entire hallway and just rotated it to get this effect of gravity shifting all the way around.
There's a really incredible scene on that special feature where someone's filming Nolan from behind, and Nolan's just standing there watching it as the hallway is rotating 360 degrees, and Levitt and the stunt actor are just fighting in 360 degree motion. It's incredible.
Yep.
And yeah, they did build that hallway to rotate. That's another iconic scene, is the hallway fight, and also when it goes into like zero gravity.
Yes.
As well. The way they're able to achieve that is wild. They did use some wires and also it kind of looks like a big claw that they kind of like held him onto, like a claw arm, and he kind of like floated through the hallway that way, and they just digitally erased it.
Yeah.
That always blows my mind though, the whole zero gravity effects, because to me that looks completely real, and I can't understand how it looks that real.
Yeah. I know with a lot of movies, there is a special plane that they use that can kind of simulate zero gravity.
Oh, wow.
I think that they used that for Apollo 13. And
that's an older one.
A lot of camera operators got sick on that one. but yeah, I always assumed that that's what it was. But I guess they just used wires, which is even cooler in my mind, because it looks so real. It looks like they actually took them up in that plane and then filmed it that way.
It does also. I would say this whole like floating around zero gravity thing, at least to my knowledge, really kicked off here in Inception. And that's another thing we've seen so much.
Yeah.
That became a really popular effect. We saw that in Gravity with Sandra Bullock. And it's even in the beginning of Rampage with The Rock.
That's right.
Yeah, and that looks pretty good in the beginning too. That gave me hope the first 2 minutes until I saw the rest of the movie. But also they did rotate the hallway, and they also built the hallway vertical, like standing up vertical. So when they're like kind of like dropping through the hallway as well. I know that when they were editing it, Lee Smith said that they held a lot of those takes without cutting it, because it was just so gripping and mesmerizing watching these people actually fight as they flipped through gravity in the hallway, that they really wanted to keep those takes long for the editing process.
Yeah.
Also, this is another effect I didn't realize, is when Cobb does the what's it called? The Mr. something scenario where he pretends that he is Fisher's security. You remember what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
And he alerts him to the reality of the dream.
Yeah.
In order to trick him. And you see like the water kind of shift and the glasses shift. And everything start to shift. They built that as an actual giant set, and they rotated it tilted it 45 degrees.
I wondered if that's what they did, because after seeing the hallway, it wasn't too far of a stretch of imagination to think that they would do the same thing with that diner scene, or I guess the bar scene, I guess is what it is. Yeah,
and they said a third of the stunt coordinators they had try out for it couldn't handle it. They couldn't do it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was that big of a deal. And I was shocked, because in the movie, they said they purposely wanted to make it look kind of slight in the movie, but it does look crazy when you watch everything move 45 degrees.
Yeah.
They also used a semi-truck and constructed the outside to look like a train. So that's how they drive the train through downtown Los Angeles.
That's right. I do remember I remember watching a featurette on that too, as well, where they showed what they did to pull the train through the middle of the street. Because it's kind of hard to do that, just in the middle of Los Angeles.
Right.
Just drive a train straight through the street. Yeah.
Yeah. And they also were really worried because it doesn't rain very much in LA.
Yep.
And they're like, we got to make this look like a rainy day. So they took super massive cranes and they used giant screens, blackout screens, to block out the sun, and they put them up on buildings to like block out like a whole strip of LA.
Oh, wow.
And then giant rain machines as well. So could have fooled me. It looks like a dark, rainy day.
It does. Yeah, it
there.
does.
And they were also, this was also difficult because rain in the daytime doesn't look as good as rain at night. They said, or gunfire in the daytime. Because they had a lot of gun battle scenes in the day. So that was another thing they had to deal with. And one other thing I was shocked to learn was when they're walking around through the empty streets of Limbo, that's actually in Morocco.
Really?
I thought that was a set, but it wasn't. That's in Morocco. They just cleared it out for shooting, and they did like a big aerial shot, and those are just like people's apartments in Morocco.
Wow, I didn't even realize that. I thought that was a set that they built, but wow. Okay, interesting.
It is interesting, and I'm like, how did they achieve some of these visuals? Because they're truly groundbreaking visual effects for this film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say this one, and again, The Dark Knight, kind of shows how much influence Christopher Nolan has as a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. Because not only with the bomb with the score, but also, like we were talking about, some of that zero gravity fighting and smaller elements from this movie in Dark Knight will be copied in some kind of a way in other Hollywood pictures.
He has exerted an incredible influence, on how some of the stuff has turned out.
Yeah. And
which is exciting because I think he has kind of paved the way for other filmmakers to be able to take more chances and not just do another $200 million remake or part 5 of something.
Right, exactly.
The only disappointing element I have with this film is when Ariadne is in Cobb's dream and she comes up into the elevator and Maul and Cobb are talking together. And then when it looks like Maul kind of looks at the camera, but she's looking at Ariadne, and there's that like jump note scare right there. That always feels out of place. It just doesn't feel like it needs to be in this movie.
Yeah, I can forgive that a little bit because it is very much kind of Cobb's nightmare, more or less, with his wife Maul. And I would say that there are a lot of the horror. There are a few horror elements here in this movie.
Yeah, there definitely are.
Yeah, that carry over from the original concept. But yeah, watching it this time, remember in the theater, that I do remember that specifically got me.
Oh yeah, got me this time too.
Yeah, but looking back on it and watching it again, it's not nearly, I guess, as impactful as what it was back when I first watched it. But yeah, I can definitely see that. One of my, and it's kind of hard to say it's a criticism of this movie, and we've seen this before. I've mentioned it. I guess we both have mentioned it multiple times in previous reviews. His characters are kind of walking exposition spillers. But I can kind of forgive it a little bit this time because this movie is so dense and is so detailed that sometimes it's best that they just spell it out to you, what exactly is happening and what the plan is, because there's so much going on in the story that I feel without that, it would make it way too convoluted to follow.
The one thing that I do appreciate they at least do is they make it more so like a tutorial or lesson. And when they do explain something or set it up, then they usually follow it through right away with jumping into a dream. And it's like, okay, it's kind of like a video game in certain ways where it's like, we just taught you how to do this. Now you go out and try it yourself.
Right.
And you see them trying to figure things out as well. And I at least like that some of the hyposition, I've just created a new word. Some of the exposition is also hypothetical as well, because it's Cobb believing they can achieve this, or Yusuf thinking they can create a powerful enough sedative. So yeah, I would say the exposition is not too bothersome to me whatsoever in this film. And of course, in every movie, you kind of have to have an audience sort of character, and that's Ariadne, who doesn't understand any of this stuff. She needs it explained to her just like we do as well. I will say he's gotten a lot better from like Batman Begins, for instance, which was one of the worst instances of it so far, I would say. And especially because I would say I couldn't connect with those characters as much in Batman Begins. Nolan's writing has vastly improved.
Yes, absolutely. Even though I still take issue with, the very clunky exposition that he has, I would say that this character that he builds here feel a lot more believable than they have in movies past. This is, I feel, his best, in terms of characters, the best character-driven movie that he's had so far. Because these characters here, they feel a lot more relatable than they have in previous movies. And especially with Cobb's character, which, needs to be relatable for his story to make a lot of sense to the audience. I think that's what really shines.
Oh, absolutely. Cobb is very relatable, and his dilemma between not wanting to see his children's faces within the dream because he fears that would sway him to ultimately give in to the dream as his reality. I love that part where he looks away and doesn't want to look at them. The dynamic he set up, the marital dynamic he set up, which does give me some vibes also with Memento, how the main character in Memento, Leonard, creates a false story concerning his wife as well as the Sammy Jenkins plot line.
Yeah.
And then you realize he is the one that caused the downfall of his wife. And he's been kind of lying to himself about that. There's some crossover here with Cobb, but Nolan's clearly taken it to the next level. I'm into these characters. I'm into also the Fisher storyline with him and his dad. So these like very parent-child or spousal relationships, like you said, they definitely really shine in this movie.
Yeah.
Now, okay. I think we got to talk about this. The very end, the final shot, where the top, we do not see the top fall.
Right.
How do you feel about that? Do you remember your first feelings of it, or how they compare to it now? Like, what do you see of it?
So for the longest time, me, like I would say probably many other people, thought that he was indicating that, was he in a dream? Was he not in a dream when the movie ended? And I remember watching an interview with Christopher Nolan where he explains this, and he says that the question of is he in a dream or is he not in a dream is the wrong question to ask, because that's not what he's getting at. What he's getting at is he going to walk away from his wife and let go of what he's done? Or is he going to come back to it? And that's indicated by the top spinning. When it begins to wobble and then it cuts to black after he's already walked away from it, that shows to us that, he's walked away from what has happened with his wife. He's forgiven himself. He's been able to move on from it. Not necessarily that is he in a dream or is he not in a dream. I can see where people can drag that or can pick that up, but I don't necessarily see that. I see that as him walking away from the guilt that he's had, because the top was the thing that was the idea that he planted inside of her mind. So I think that one just makes a lot more sense to me. It has a lot more impact than is he in a dream or is he not in a dream version of the ending.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation of it. I had never even thought of it that way. I guess when you do go back and think about it, Cobb, whenever he does spin the top, he just hones in on that. He gets his gun ready.
Yeah.
In case. But the fact that he goes through this ordeal with Saito, and Saito follows through with the phone call, and he gets to go through customs, and he does get to see his children again, I would say that does give the viewer hope that he is living in reality. Now, I think there is some probably postmodern interpretation to this, that he chooses his own reality. It doesn't even matter if he's within a dream or something.
Yeah.
I just remember the first time I saw it being frustrated. When I first saw it, I'm like, what kind of, don't do that to us.
Yeah.
So I would say that Nolan's explanation is a very good explanation for it. And watching the top, you do see the top wobble.
Yeah.
And otherwise in the dream,
absolutely wobbles.
Yeah, in the dream it perfectly spins.
Mm-hmm.
It never ever gives any hint of wobbling it, which is a cool visual, by the way, watching it perfectly spin. But so in my mind, I always thought it would pan back to the top, and the top would be done spinning. It would just be like laying on its side, and it'd have like a, I don't know, I guess a very nice, peaceful Hollywood romanticized ending to it. But I will say that in some ways, not having the top fall, not showing that to us, is still going to be probably my only major criticism of this movie is that taking us on such a vast emotional deep journey and then kind of cutting off that finality for us, kind of not giving us, he does give us closure because he does get back to the family, but then kind of bringing the top back into our focus and then cutting it off. I think Nolan is a brilliant filmmaker, but I think here he's trying to be possibly a little too clever with showing us that at the end and cutting it off. That's my criticism of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really feel the same way, mostly because I'm not necessarily viewing it as, as I guess we're both viewing it in a little bit different way. I'm not necessarily viewing it as, is he or is he not in reality. I see it more as him completely walking away from the guilt that he used to have with his wife. And that's why I find it not nearly, I guess, as troublesome as you do, is because we see the visual of him walking away, and then you see the top wobble as if to say that, what happened with his wife is done. And his wife controlling what happens in his dreams is no longer what's going to be happening anymore. And so when you see it wobble, then it cuts to black. We get the picture as to what this character is going to be doing next, which is pretty much not what we had seen in the movie in the 2.5 hours leading up to this moment. I guess that's why I don't see it nearly as troublesome as you do.
Do you think there would have been less of an impact, though, if the way I said it is if it would have panned back and the top would have stopped spinning and it's just a shot of the top laying on its side, it had finished its spin? Would that have been less impactful than just cutting to black? Or would it just have conveyed the same sensibilities? I know cutting to black somewhat leaves it up to your interpretation, because everybody's going to associate it not so much with him leaving behind the guilt, but with whether he's in the dream or not, because that's what he's trying to figure out. I do love that, what you said about leaving the guilt behind. He's chosen to run to his children instead of to be transfixed on the top, which has possessed him this whole time. But I'm just wondering, would it have felt... I mean, I guess I kind of want this, nice, soft Hollywood ending, I guess, where the top's just laying there. Yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, per se. But I don't know. Would it have maybe knocked the storytelling down a little bit? I don't know. It's kind of hard to say, because I feel like if going down that route could even mean a different movie than what Nolan had set out to tell in the first place as well. Now, that being said, I mean, I guess having the top topple over, I don't know. It really is hard to say, given what Nolan's execution has been all the way up to that point as well. So I don't know. I guess the thing that semi bothers me with it, though, is, and I'm of the firm belief that he is back in the real world and he's going to leave this dream world behind, or else everything we saw kind of would have been for naught. He still would have learned his lesson, but it kind of would have been utterly illogical to say that someone's kept him in this captive dream state forever and he's created this elaborate ruse of getting back to his children and overcoming his guilt. I don't think there's really anywhere to find that interpretation of it. I guess what I'm a little annoyed by is Nolan's been pretty consistent with his worldview of objective truth, but people can create their own subjective truth within it, like with Leonard within Memento. But he's still come down on the side of there is a reality to everything. And this kind of lands on the side of it doesn't really matter if everything is real or not. It's mostly just what matters is what you believe or what you choose to accept. I don't know. That just kind of bugs me a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah, I guess I never really got that part either, because he definitely tries to show us, what is and is not real. And as we see with Maul's character, she was possessed by this idea that nothing's real, right? That she's almost constantly in this dream. And so it's maybe even in some ways Cobb battling against, him slipping and having the same fate, or even having what he has done before happen again to the character of Fisher, where maybe he falls into this limbo and even Saito as well. He falls into this limbo of where he's just there forever and kind of loses his grasp on reality. And then when we see with Saito and him at the very end have that conversation, he even says, come back to reality, because Saito's been down there for so many years that there's maybe the fear that he's completely lost touch of it. So I would say it's Nolan fighting against what is subjective reality versus something that is actual reality, and making sure that this is, I would say, Cobb's kind of character motivation is making sure that fixing his mistakes of what he did with his wife, fixing somebody so that way they don't fall into the same idea, that being someone's subjective reality not being what is actually real. I would say that's what Nolan is going for in this movie.
Yeah, I would say those are like very good points and very valid points. And I would agree that that's probably where Nolan weighs out the most in the end of the overall view of the film. I will say, though, that there is little hints of kind of this like postmodernism. It doesn't really matter if it's true. What matters is it matters if the belief makes you feel good about it or not. And we see that with Fisher's character, because Cillian Murphy's character finds the pinwheel, and the whole purpose of the Inception is to completely alter someone's belief in the truth, because his dad was likely very much disappointed in him. But now he is going to live with this feeling that his dad wasn't disappointed with him, which is a much nicer feeling to go with, but it's not true. And that's the thing where I feel like he kind of walks a tightrope there a little bit at the end with Cobb, is that Cobb does ultimately achieve what he wants through some great task that he has overcome. But once again, it's like, it doesn't really matter if he is in reality or in a dream. What matters is that he succeeded in overcoming his demons. Some of that postmodernism, I think, gets a little bit much. We talked about postmodernism in The Dark Knight as well. This is a little bit of a different variety of it, but at least it creates good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess let me ask you this then. Do you think it's asking the question, and this is mostly in the character of Fisher, do you think it's asking the question of to believe in a different reality, that of his father not, believing instead of his father being disappointed at him, being the opposite, being, I'm disappointed that you tried to be like me, taking that idea and flipping it around? Is that, you think that's him believing a different reality, or do you think it's Fisher believing, maybe looking at a situation in just a different way, instead of maybe just believing in a different reality?
That's the thing that troubles me a little bit, is that it is also Fisher's perception, but it's also these external forces trying to craft a different perception from within to achieve their own goals. So in a way, it's not terribly noble what they're doing. It seems like they're trying to stop a monopoly from occurring that would dominate the world's energy. So it seems kind of good because we don't want a monopoly. But at the same time, they are deeply affecting his life as well. So so here's what I would say. I would say that this is ultimately Fisher believing what he's always wanted to believe. Every child wants their parent to be proud of them and to love them. And that absence has turned him into a very cold person. But there at the end, it's a very powerful moment. But nevertheless, I don't think that he's looking at his dad and life necessarily in a different way. I think you could make the case that he is he's loving his dad, maybe appreciating a memory, a time when him and his dad were very loving towards each other, until after his mom's death, and his dad lost his wife, and then they grew very cold towards each other. So I think it could be a reevaluation of the love for his dad. You could look at it in a positive aspect in that way, but I would say so far in the negative aspect, it is him believing something false, that his dad ultimately wasn't proud of him, but it does restir those old feelings that, yeah, my dad once upon a time did love me. once again, Nolan is a master at making us think about this.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's kind of my point too, is that this is kind of the same in The Dark Knight too, where the good characters have to do something kind of immoral in order to stop the evil forces. And this is kind of in the same vein where our main character has to change somebody's view of some situation in order to stop his business from being the monopoly. It might not be the most noble way of going about it, but he does do it out of somewhat maybe necessity, but also at the same time for himself, so we can get back with his family again. It's kind of hard to say, if it's a good or a bad thing that he did this, although I think The Dark Knight is playing more with that idea of is it good or bad that they did this. But this is, I would say, play with that idea still. And I think that's kind of what Nolan is going more towards, is that gray area of, are these characters as noble as maybe we would like them to be? And I think that's where this makes his movie so interesting, is that gray area. There isn't really hard to say what's right and not right in the situation. It's hard to say, who's correct and who's not correct or whatever. It's these characters being put in this situation. They have to get out of it somehow. That's just how life is. I think that's what makes this movie as interesting, or even his Fast Few movies as interesting, is that maybe their characters aren't as good or as bad or as we think that they may be, or as they initially come off as.
But that also makes us examine our own life and the things we do, because I think oftentimes most people tell what we call white lies more often than we'd like to admit. And it's always with good intentions. It's always because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or you want to not lower your esteem in the other person's eyes. And I think in some ways, no one kind of seizes on that idea of this white lie. Because you are not telling the truth, you are changing that person's perception of the truth in order to make them feel better, and honestly to make yourself feel better as well. And he just kind of expands that into this crazy dream, and what if you were able to plant that Inception in someone's mind? And in a way, I think that's kind of what a white lie is kind of like Inception, where you tell somebody a shade or a version of the truth in order to change something about them and about yourself. Yeah.
Right.
So I think he does a great job of kind of making us examine ourselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, of course, we've discussed this in great detail. So, I mean, I would say that in of itself is very admirable to see in a movie of these days.
This is one of his films. I would probably say, from my recollection, this and The Dark Knight are his biggest discussion ones.
Oh yeah, absolutely. These two, there's a reason why they're as high on the IMDb top 250, because there's so much to them. There's so much thought put into these movies that makes them so interesting and so interesting just to discuss some of the ideas and concepts that are brought up in them. I think that's why they are as impactful and are as important today, because they cause so much discussion and have so much meat to them.
Well, Alan, what is your rating and recommendation for Inception?
So Inception, man, it's been a couple years since I've seen this. I know last time I watched it would have probably been college. But that all said, it was very nice to return to this movie because I forgot how much I actually loved it. And it's kind of hard for me to say which one I like more. I don't know if I like The Dark Knight more or if I like this one more. I think I might go Dark Knight, but that's mostly just because of the Joker. So yeah, this one and The Dark Knight are packed full of ideas and packed full of things to discuss. But for Inception alone, I think it's definitely the more original out of the two, because it's not based off of really anything. It's based off of Nolan's ideas, or Jonathan Nolan's ideas, or whoever's ideas. It's not really based off of a pre-existing property. And I think it's what makes it so interesting too, is it now has a playground to make up its own stuff, which it absolutely does, because it's all about dreams, which means that no one can do anything he wants to. So yeah, I absolutely loved Inception, and I would love to return to it to discover more about it, because that's one thing I always figured is, even though I've seen it probably a dozen times, I feel like I always find something else that I didn't notice before in it. So yeah, I absolutely love Inception. I think it does have some clunky exposition, but and some characters that are more of walking robots, like we have seen before in Christopher Nolan's movies, which is unfortunate to say, but it's still extremely enjoyable. So I'm gonna say it's a 10 out of 10 for me. I absolutely love Inception. I just bought it off my cousin, the Blu-ray. I had it on DVD, but I sold it and just never bought it on Blu-ray. So that's it. 10 out of 10. High recommend for me.
Inception is a modern masterpiece. When a creator is allowed to unleash his unbridled potential through the pen and through modern visual effects, we're presented with a film never before seen, except maybe only in our dreams. So far, this is Christopher Nolan's best film. It achieves incredible emotional depths and intricate, thought-provoking situations we may never see again cinematically in our lifetime. Inception receives 10 stars out of 10, with my highest recommendation.
So do you consider this better than Dark Knight then? Absolutely, or is there room for discussion as to which one's better?
I gave The Dark Knight a 9 out of 10, and so this one's a 10 out of 10, so I see it as slightly better for me personally. Okay. This is personally so far, I don't know. We haven't reviewed the next ones yet. I haven't put my SSG goggles on for those, but so far this is my favorite Nolan film. Although I do love The Dark Knight, I think this one is probably a little more enjoyable to watch because of just the incredible creative exploration and intricate plot. The Dark Knight is an incredible spiral down into anarchy and socialism and madness, and it's just all over the place. It's incredible, but they're very, very different. But both are utterly brilliant. But Inception's my favorite. But are you of the different mind on that?
I don't know. The more I think about it, the more divisive I get, because I can say, okay, well, Inception's the more original movie, but at the same time, I think in terms of what it has to talk about, I think The Dark Knight is the more interesting movie to discuss because of its more political view, and its view on the social aspect of an idea versus an internal aspect of an idea, with Inception. Yeah. It's really hard to say. It's hard for me to really think, or it's hard for me to make a decision as to which one I think is better than the other one. I think that they both are very similar in a lot of ways, but in terms of which one I would like more, I don't know. It's very, very hard for me to choose which one. Even though I give The Dark Knight a 9 and this one a 10, I would say that if I were to pick one and not the other, it would be a very tough decision to make.
So after watching Inception, Alan, what other movie would you recommend to our listeners?
It's very hard to recommend a movie that's somewhat like Inception, because Inception's, like we have talked about, kind of original.
Yes.
However, a movie about dreams is not necessarily the most original thing yet, because I do know that there is an anime called Paprika by Satoshi Kon, who also did a very famous movie called Perfect Blue, and then a few years after that, Millennium Actress. So if you haven't seen that, it's an anime. If you haven't seen it, I would say absolutely go watch it. I think it's actually a really good companion piece to Inception, although it does have more Japanese roots. So that's the movie that I think I would definitely recommend the most. If you want more like this, go watch Paprika.
And there are some significant Japanese roots in this film as well. They did draw a lot of Japanese architecture when designing some of these scenes. They said in the special features. Another interesting connection, because you brought up Perfect Blue, is that Darren Aronofsky has the rights to Perfect Blue.
That's right.
And he made Black Swan, which competed with Inception at the Oscars. So it's all tied together. Inception is real. And
I do remember that Darren Aronofsky asked Satoshi Kon at the time, because there's a shot in both of the movies where the main character is like, has her face down in a bathtub and she screams into the water. It's in both movies. He asked Satoshi Kon, can I use that? And he said yes. And so that's why Black Swan is copied. It's just a scene from Perfect Blue. For a little fun fact.
They also ripped that off in The Turning, which I just watched with Mackenzie Davis.
Oh, really?
Yep. Same shot. That movie's not as good as either of those other two movies you just mentioned. But anyways, so my recommendations, I would absolutely recommend that you see Dark City, Alex Proyas's Dark City, please watch the director's cut first, because the theatrical cut, I know the theatrical cut is streaming on some, it might be streaming free on some big platforms right now, I think on Vudu. The theatrical cut kind of ruins that story. Dark City is very similar to Inception. Does feel very dreamlike within its state and within its characters, and trying to recognize what is real and what is identity. It plays with memories and things like that as well. It's a great film. And the other movie I would recommend you watch is Hugo, because Hugo might not seem like the likely companion piece to Inception, but Hugo is all about the wonder and birth of imagination onto the cinematic screen. And if we don't have like A Trip to the Moon, which is Georges Méliès, who is one of the characters in Hugo, who kind of invented like storytelling and basically brought his dreams to life onto the screen, I think we can see that 100 years later here with Inception, how that has still impacted filmmakers as well. So definitely go watch Hugo by Martin Scorsese. It's a fantastic film that was also at the Oscars around this time as well. It's interesting. Well, we are not coming back to Nolan for a little bit.
Yes, just for a couple weeks.
Just for a couple weeks. Nolan took a 2-year hiatus between Inception and The Dark Knight Rises, and let this be known, Nolan took 4 years between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises.
That's right, yes.
It is a long wait. So we're going to take about 4 weeks or so.
Yep.
We're going to do something really different. We're going to give you a little different flavor here, listeners, different side of cinema. Next week, we are going to be reviewing Jinro, The Wolf Brigade.
That's right. The old anime from 1988, followed by the live-action remake on Netflix.
Yes, followed by the live-action remake. And it is nice because Jinro is on Prime Video for you subscribers, but it's also free on Tubi TV right now.
That's right. That's right. And I have seen Jinro. I watched it also in college. It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm kind of excited to come back and see what my thoughts are now being a few years away from it.
Okay, I've forgotten you had seen this movie. I thought we were both fresh on it.
I'm fresh for the live-action remake, but the anime I have seen before, yeah.
And it is weird because the Netflix one came out to very little fanfare. The Netflix one is in Japanese. I don't know if they have a English dub of it or not. Clearly it's subtitled. But I don't know. They thought it was good enough to remake. I guess a couple of decades later. I'm pretty excited to see those as well. And we're still going to kind of stick with anime as well, because after that, we have been talking about this movie on Silver Screen Guide. We've brought it up in many conversations, but we've never actually seen it.
Right. I've seen pieces, but I haven't seen it all the way through.
I've seen about 3 seconds of footage and still images.
It will be the oldest movie we have ever reviewed, actually. 1927.
Yeah. King Kong was about 5 years older, or excuse me, younger, I should say. So yeah, the oldest movie we've ever reviewed, Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Right. And as we mentioned in the King Kong review, it was one of the earliest talkies. And so, yeah, Metropolis will be completely silent. No dialogue.
No dialogue. And if I'm right, it's like over 2 hours.
It depends on what cut you have.
Okay.
There are like 5 different cuts. There's an hour-and-a-half cut. There's an hour and 50-minute cut. There's a 2-hour cut, like a 2.5-hour cut. There's all kinds of stuff because they kept finding footage from this movie. Every few years, they'd find more footage and slap it in. Yeah. So they haven't gotten it all complete yet, but they have most of it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's probably going to be as complete as it ever will.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I think you're right. There's like a little bit of footage still missing, but thankfully we do have mostly all of Fritz Lang's vision with it as well. That would be kind of sad if we didn't, but we'll get into more detail when we review that. But I am super excited for that review.
I am too. I'm excited to actually just watch it all the way through because I never really, had a good reason to do that yet. But yeah.
And also, we will be reviewing the week after that Rintaro's Metropolis, which is an anime that came out in 2001. I just picked up the glorious steelbook. Oh,
I'm very jealous. It's been on my Amazon wish list forever. But because I have a rule that I don't buy movies I haven't seen, I haven't bought it yet.
I have that rule too, but I made an exception for this one. I have seen it. I watched it once and my mind was completely blown. That's a little bit of a teaser for what's to come in the next few weeks here.
Excited.
But I am so excited to review Rintaro's Metropolis because from what I understand, it does draw a lot of inspiration from the Fritz Lang Metropolis, but they're made so far apart and it's still very different. And of course, they bring some Japanese influence.
Right.
Roger Ebert, just to give you a little preview, gave it a 4 out of 4. And he said, like, if you've never watched an anime movie before, then this is the one to watch. This is the one that shows you how great anime can be. Yeah.
I'm very excited to watch it. I'm so excited. I've been wanting to see it for years and haven't gotten the chance to.
It's not the first anime we reviewed. We reviewed Ghost in the Shell and all of the Ghost in the Shell films and Akira.
Yep. And Your Name. We also reviewed Your Name.
Oh, that's right. That's a good point. I forgot about that. So yeah, we've got plenty of anime to review. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to wait till next week to see what we think of Jinro, then there's plenty of anime. I'll drop a link in the description below to all of our anime reviews as well. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Sure thing.
Yeah, it was a great discussion, and we don't want the discussion to end here, listeners. So the question after the show is, how do you feel about the top? Not seeing the top fall, seeing it wobble. I mean, I say it wobbles, but maybe some people think there's room for that top to keep going. Mm-hmm. So I think that would probably cause the most discussion as well. How do you interpret the final shot, the top going? But I'm curious to see what you think, listeners. So that's the question after the show. Make sure to comment below so we can have a great discussion about that. And we will see you next week with Jinro the Wolf Brigade. Hey listeners, it's Corbin. Don't forget to check out the exciting links in the description below that will connect you with more great movie reviews for your listening pleasure, and our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page, and of course our official website where you can read great articles and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Also, if you want exclusive bonus content such as extra movie reviews, movie commentaries, and our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, plus more, then check out our Patreon page. It's a great way to help keep this show free, and it gives you great content that's yours to keep. All of that and more is found in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Google, or Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review so other movie lovers can more easily find our podcast. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So don't forget to share with your friends and family, and we'll see you next week, listeners. The Silver Screen Guide podcast is edited and produced by Allen and Corbin. Intro and outro music is created by Thomas Rankin. The thoughts and opinions herein expressed are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent those held by Silver Screen Guide. Silver Screen Guide is not affiliated with any company or individual involved with the creation of this movie or TV show. No portion of the podcast may be used without express written permission from Silver Screen Guide.
This really shows, as if it hadn't before, this really shows not only how good of a storyteller the Nolan brothers are, but also how good of editors their movie, or how good edited. How I say this? How well it also shows how well edited their movies are. Because again,